program today. This is a grant through the Alabama Humanities Alliance, and Paul Barrett has helped us to pull together this conversation with Cynthia Kirana and Adam Rutkowski from Troy University. So I'd like to turn the time over to Paul.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you everybody for being here. If you will indulge me, I'm going to rely on my notes so that I do not misspeak as I introduce our panelists. Dr. Adam Rutkowski is an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at our neighbor Troy University. He earned a BA in Political Science from Augusta University in Augusta, Georgia, and a PhD in Political Science and International Affairs from the University of Georgia. So thank you for being here, Adam. And Cynthia Kirana, whose exhibition is installed currently here at the Johnson Center for the Arts, and which I hope everyone will take time to check out at the end of the talk, is a multidisciplinary artist from Jakarta, Indonesia, who immigrated to the United States with her family at the age of 12 due to political unrest caused by the Suharto regime and the targeting of Chinese descendants in Indonesia. She earned her MFA at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, has worked with the AP College Board as a content creator and AP Studio Art reader, founded Expose Art, and the Art House in Montgomery, and currently divides her time between Montgomery, Atlanta, Georgia, and New York City. So thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you.
So to begin, this is your exhibition, and a lot of the works here, and particularly the materials in your works, are inspired by childhood memories and your upbringing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to go back to like the experience of being a refugee and having to leave the country, because when you leave a country, you can only bring a certain items with you, and a lot of the time you don't have a choice what to bring. So when I left my country, I was only able to bring one suitcase, the clothing that I wear that day, and I wasn't able to bring my books, my trinkets, the items that I like to collect. I'm an avid collector. Sometimes people say, oh no, you're just a hoarder. No, I'm a selective hoarder. So when I was younger, I collect erasers, stickers, and things like this. And I think part of my practice now is that the way that I collect things just remind me of those time of me collecting items in my childhood. So a lot of the items that are here and the art that are here are using materials that I've collected over the years, such as eggshells, ashes, carbon, and most of those materials are from my parents' Chinese restaurant. That was the occupation that they choose to do when they move here, because it's a strange country and you don't know anybody, and what can you do to survive? And restaurant was one of the things that it's a community. It's a safe space for us as a Chinese immigrants, or not really immigrants, but Chinese refugee, Chinese descent. My parents still speak Chinese fluently. I don't, so they were able to find these jobs doing waitressing and things like this. And then eventually they were able to have their own restaurants, and that's where I spent most of my childhood, is working with them. You can call it child labor, but if you work in a Chinese family restaurant, it's a little hard. But yeah, so a lot of these materials are a way for me to connect to my childhood, a way for me to connect to my identity, a way for me to feel a part of belonging to a certain community. Yeah, that's a whirlwind answer, but hope I answered
No,
your
thank
question.
you. Adam, we are all able to see a lot of strife around the world and political unrest in different countries, but a lot of people may not be familiar with the Suharto regime in Indonesia and the particular circumstances that led Cynthia's family to leave Indonesia and settle in Alabama. Can you tell us a little bit about the events that were going on at that time to set the stage for why some of these things became so special for her?
Absolutely. So I think when a lot of people think of Indonesia, they think of Bali, right? Bucket list travel destinations. But Indonesia has one of the most disturbed and chaotic political histories from anywhere around the world. And so before speaking about Suharto, we have to think about his predecessor, Sukarno. So Sukarno came to power right after Indonesia achieved its independence from the Dutch. So Indonesia was a Dutch colony, and then it was under Japanese control during World War II, and then it went back to the Dutch. So they won their independence in the late 1940s. Sukarno comes to power with an idea of a wonderful liberal democracy, okay, a parliamentary system, a prime minister with a very minuscule role for the president himself. That didn't last long because of the economic shambles that Indonesia was in because of colonial rule. So he quickly started something called guided democracy. Guided democracy was less like democracy and more like authoritarianism. And one key component of that guided democracy was a very strong and violent army. Another factor that Sukarno contended with was the PKI, or the Indonesian Communist Party. And so he was always grappling with these two forces that did not like each other at all. Eventually the PKI infiltrated the government, infiltrated the army, eventually staged a coup against the military and killed 6 very high-ranking army officials. One of the army officials who was not murdered brutally was Suharto. Suharto was conveniently not around when this happened. These were Suharto's friends and colleagues in the army. He knew this was going to happen. Suharto eventually comes to power. There's other stuff I'm leaving out. I'm trying not to be a professor and lecture. However, Suharto comes to power and his main mission is anti-communism. So that sets off a decades-long mission against communism. During the 1960s, right after he came to power, I know, Cynthia, your grandparents were involved with this. Over 500,000 Indonesians were murdered because they were suspected to have ties with communism. A lot of that anger and hate and violence was targeted toward the Chinese, ethnic Chinese in Indonesia. Indonesia at the time was the 2nd largest communist party in the world, right behind China. And so that persisted. We'll probably talk more about the anti-Chinese laws under Suharto, but it was a very violent and unwelcoming time in Indonesia for those of Chinese ancestry.
Thank you. Cynthia, you've mentioned that you wish that you spoke and understood Chinese a little bit better than you do now, but that you are fluent in Indonesian. Can you talk to us a little bit about what it was like sort of having a foot in 2 different worlds where you had family members who were speaking Chinese, but the desire to fit in with friends and neighbors who were speaking Indonesian, and whether or not some of that was motivated by the political unrest and outright danger that Adam was describing?
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's a matter of like, I think when you're different, you just want to belong, and you know, there's this desire of us as human to feel connected, to feel like we can be in a group. And so growing up, my grandparents will speak to me in Chinese and I will reply to them in Indonesian, which is, now that thinking about it, it's terrible because that's part of my identity that I lost, right? But at the time, it was necessary for us. Like, they would not be able to, they meaning my grandparents, will not be able to buy things outside their house without speaking Indonesian. Like, if they speak Chinese, then, danger can come to them. So that's one of the things. But for me, I was still young, so my whole thing was about, I didn't know this whole danger existed because I feel like, okay, I'm here, I just want to be Indonesian, I want to have friends, I want to be able to be accepted. And so I sort of stay away from that part of my identity, which is the Chinese identity, and fully embracing this Indonesian identity. I think now, because of that, I felt the deep connection and the deep desire to go back to that, reconnecting with my culture, and that is why a lot of these materials are materials that are associated with in my culture, so that I could feel like I could, I feel like I could connect with it. So I think like there is a word for people like me who are born in one country and living in another country, and they feel like they don't belong in both countries. It's the third culture kid. And being in Indonesia at that time, I was only focusing on, okay, I'm Indonesian, and then I have this Chinese identity too. But then moving to America, then it's like, oh no, so it's like everything just kind of moved. Like, I feel like the ground is shifting again, and now I have this third identity that I can associate with. And sometimes I still feel like I'm on the outside. So there's this third identity is my Southern identity. So it's like, what does it mean to be an Chinese Indonesian Southern artist, right? It's like, yeah, that's kind of still a question that I'm exploring in my work. Yeah.
So sort of the Ni hao ma yao.
Yeah, Ni hao ma yao. I like that. Yeah, but the funny is not, okay, it could be funny. So I split my time in New York also, and I spent a lot of my time in Chinatown, New York, because, I need access to my materials. So whenever I go to Chinatown, people will just speak to me in Chinese, and then I would say, oh, wo puchitao, like, I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't know. And then they're like, oh, what do you mean you don't know? You're Chinese, like, you should learn Chinese. And I'm like, yes, I'm so sorry. So sorry. So yeah, shame on me. But yeah, I think that's on my bucket list, is to be able to relearn part of my culture through language.
Thank you.
To speak on language for a second, when we think about culture, there are really three big things that are a part of all of our cultures. Our language, right, a shared language, whether that be written or spoken. Under Suharto, Chinese could not be taught, it could not be spoken publicly, and it could not be written down publicly. Chinese script was banned from public streets. Another thing we think of is education. All Chinese schools were closed in Indonesia. Over 600 schools were closed in one fell swoop. Culture, holidays, customs, any public celebrations of, say, Chinese New Year, strictly outlawed. And so it was, people describe it as a cultural genocide.
Yeah, we have to change our name. So I have a Chinese name and I have an Indonesian name. So the Chintia Kirana is my Indonesian name. But we all have to change our name to an Indonesian name if we want to have paperwork, property, all those things.
And there are artists over many decades, if not centuries, artists who fled the Nazis in World War II. Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, Ruth Bernhardt, the photographer who came to New York. Later, when the Ayatollah Khomeini came to power in Iran and overthrew the Shah, there were artists like Shirin Nishat who fled Iran to come to the United States.
Yeah.
And then even currently, artists like Ai Weiwei, who visit China or any Chinese-controlled territory at his peril.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the Gao brothers, after making artwork critical of Mao for many, many years, was arrested by Chinese authorities just within the past several weeks, and has been sort of disappeared as his brother tries to find out what's going on. Adam, can you tell us a little bit about the American political system and the way that that treatment is perceived abroad that has made the United States look like a safe haven for so many creative people seeking refuge from conflict or persecution?
Right, well, absolutely. When we think about freedom of expression, whether that be art, language, etc., all of that's very closely tied to the First Amendment. When we think about the First Amendment, we often think about freedom of speech. That's the first one that comes to mind. But collectively, the First Amendment is one short sentence with 6 clauses within that sentence, and collectively is freedom of expression. And of all of the parts of our Constitution, all of the amendments, a lot of those were, perhaps surprisingly, given the history there, were based on British laws and customs. The First Amendment, the idea of freedom of expression, is perhaps the most uniquely American concept, right? And the colonists, the framers of the Constitution, were inspired by their lack of freedom of expression to include that in the Bill of Rights. So I think from the founding, right, from 1776 to 1789, 1791, that has been a central message of America, right? Freedom of expression, freedom to be who you are here. Now, of course, we've had our issues, right, with that. However, thinking about art exclusively, I can see how it would be considered a refuge for artists from around the world fleeing some type of persecution, whether that be political, religious, etc.
Thank you. And when we were having lunch earlier today, you were talking about the way that you feel when you see Christmas decorations. Indonesia is the most populous Muslim majority nation on earth, and yet you grew up in a Buddhist and Christian household. Can you tell us a little bit about what you remember of that as a child and how that has influenced the art that you're making now?
Yeah, sure. My fondest memory of Christmas is when my parents gave me a set of crayons. I remember it. It's a Sakura crayon from Japan. At that time, it was one of those long, like really highly pigmented and just like professional grade crayon. And I'm just like, oh my God, yes. And so that was their first gift to me. And I blamed them for being an artist because of them. But, sometimes, when they're like, oh no, what are you doing? I'm like, well, you gave me that first set of crayon, But yeah, so that first set of crayon and a coloring book was my fondest memory. I remember also, going to my grandmother's house and from my mom's side and decorating the tree. And then the week after, I have this alternate schedule between grandparents. So 1 week to the Christian grandparents and then the other week to the Buddhist grandparents. So whenever I'm with my Christian grandparents, we would go to church and do all of the Christian things, whatever that may be. And then go to my my Buddhist grandparents, in the mornings, you always have karaoke for me. And then after that, then, we'd go to the temple and things like this. So I always live in this sort of duality of idea. Grandma, from my mom, there's the idea of Christianity where things are it's like, okay, yeah, you do good things and you go to heaven, so to speak. The Buddhists, you do good thing and then you reincarnate to something better. So there's always this like concept of duality that I always think about in my work, whether it be absent or present, whether it be shadow or light. But yeah, that's how it kind of transpired. And fondest memory from my Buddhist side of the family. I remember going to this city, I don't remember what it's called anymore, but we were driving so long because we needed to go to this temple that's supposed to be like the temple at this province. And we were driving. We get there and, all the smoke of incense just hit you in the face. And you can't really open your eyes. It's so painful because all the smokes are just there. But seeing my grandparents being so dedicated, there is this ritualism that I see with their practice because they were so disciplined in getting up in the morning. I mean, if it's Sunday, then they're like doing karaoke in the morning. But before that, they will lit the candle in their altar, and they would lit the incense. And it's always 3 and 3 and 3. So every time they go to the first altar, it's 3 incense put down, and then they go around the house and they do this. And so for me, I think my work now is like, it's in series and it's in numbers. And maybe that's also like the influence of that. Like I'm always thinking about numbers. I'm always thinking about like making things in series. I don't know if it's continuation that I seek for, but it's very comforting, I think, like to have them in a group, in a series, like, together. Yeah, so again, I'm mumbling and
No.
I mean, the questions that you asked me, like all of these questions brought me back like years ago to all of those memories. So everything just kind of explode in my head, right now. Maybe I also have ADD, but it's really, thank you for asking those questions because it does give me an opportunity to reflect back. Mm-hmm. And then I think it's really important for an artist to reflect back and move forward. It's kind of like this dance that we do, in our practice, like you step back and then you move forward to create the work that you wanted to create. But yeah, it definitely has influence on my practice in terms of materials, in terms of the way that I do certain things in my work, definitely. In terms of these like ritualism, I make marks, like you see, I make repetitive marks. I make marks with heat, I make marks with pigment. I just, this repetition, it's very meditative. And that's a big part of my Buddhist religion is this kind of ritual repetition and reflection.
Meditative is actually a word that came to my mind when I was looking at it. And because our audience joining us from home is able to see the pieces behind you, would you mind talking a little bit about the materiality of these works and the process of creating them?
Sure. Looking at my work, I always have to go back to the starting of the work. So this work started after my Letter to Loved One series, which is this series that I made after my grandparents passed away. I was able to visit them 2 times since I left my country. And so after they passed, there's all these things that I wanted to say to them that I didn't really get a chance to say. So then, going back to my Buddhist practice and how am I able to connect with my grandparents, even though that they're in this, spiritual realm. And so what I did was I took ashes that I've been collecting, and these ashes are from burning of joss paper, which is we call ghost money. So every Chinese New Year, we would have ghost monies, we will have, what do you call that, paper mache clothing or items to burn. And the idea is like burning these things will give this thing to your ancestors. So it's kind of like, this is how you connect to your past loved ones. Yeah, loved ones. So then from there, I thought, okay, well, if this is how we communicate, then perhaps the ashes that I'm taking from this and then creating my work is a way for me to be able to kind of communicate with them, not directly. So I started making this work and paintings with using those ashes that I've been collected. And these are, I started making notes, but it's using those marks. So there's this language thing, but it's a more abstracted language, So I started making these marks, and then I started burning them and layering them, because like memory, like language and memory sort of goes hand in hand, where sometimes, the things that you want to remember the most will come up, in your foremind, and it's brighter or darker or whatever, more apparent. And then things that you want to forget will be in the background. It's more, what do you call it, translucent, it's more like shadowy. So the work comes after that. And so I started making these marks, and then, about language. And then I started thinking about, the mark as time, not only language, like a prisoner when you mark your time. Like sometimes I feel like a prisoner in my own world. But I started making these marks. And at that time, I went to Europe often, and then I see these doorways and arches, and somehow, that shape starting to seep in, and that's the work that you see. I know you're asking about this work, but now I'm going back to
they relate.
Right. So then, so I started making these marks and arches, which you can see in the third room in the back. And I see the arch. It's a doorway, it's a window, it's a passageway. But there's still limitation and boundaries to this thing, right? It could either be an opening where you could go through it, or a trap door. So there's this boundary. And then I thought to myself in the studio, well, what if the shape is a square where, these lines are just going up and down in the infinite whatever, right? And so then I started creating these lines that are more square base, changing the colors to red. Red is Red is a Chinese like heavy color. It's color of luck. It's a color of love. It's a color of wealth. But this is where my Southern identity come to play, right? Red is redlining, right? Red is discrimination. Red is displacement. Red is boundary. So I like to create work that have these double meanings, meaning that are close to me, but also meaning that are part of these other identity that I associate with. So.
And what is the red pigment in these works?
These are just pigment.
Okay, so
yeah.
these are paint.
Yeah, these are
okay.
pigment. And the black is a matte black. So there's an artist in UK, Stuart Semple. He created this black. And the story is he has,
beef with Anish Kapoor.
He has a beef with another artist named Anish Kapoor, where he created this Vanta black, and it's supposed to be the darkest black in the world. So Stuart started creating his own black, and he sells it to any artist that would like, except for Anish Kapoor. So you have to sign like a little agreement that you're not Anish Kapoor when you purchase these things. But but I like the way that the black really contrasts with the red, because the black sort of sucks you in. And oftentimes I think black is the strongest. It's the most powerful shade for me, because if you think about black, black is all the colors mixed together. Right? So yeah, so I enjoy using black. I think black is also a symbol of death in some culture, but a lot of my work it's about life and death also. But you know, death in the sense of like more of a hopeful situation, not like, okay, yeah, you know, death everywhere. But yeah, so I hope I can answer your question.
Oh, thank you. I'm curious, when you were talking about collecting the ashes from the ghost money when you spent time with your Buddhist grandparents, did you observe Ash Wednesday with your Christian grandparents?
So I don't remember it, but you know, so I do. Okay, I grew up in this two religion. I go to a Catholic school, so my growing up, you know,
Catholic school would definitely.
Yes, so I remember it through the Catholic procession and all of the ritualism that they do, because at school they will take us to the Catholic church also. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's something that you are familiar with,
Yeah.
but it wasn't part of your family tradition.
Right.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
No problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit more, and for the folks at home who are not able to see the work in the next room behind Adam, there is a glorious cascade of broken eggshells suspended from the ceiling over a panel of mirrors so that it creates beautiful reflections with the light, as well as giving you this almost endless depth to look down and see the bottoms of the eggshells. Can you talk to us a little bit about collecting those shells and what that piece means to you?
Sure. Actually, I started the piece in the other room in 2012. That's the first one that I created in 2012. And it's essentially eggshells that I've collected from my parents' restaurant. And this piece come after I came back from Indonesia for the first time. Seeing my grandparents, seeing all of my family members, my cousins who are growing up. So it's this weird duality where you see your grandparents getting older, so there's this, you know, like death coming, you know, for them, and then you see your cousin getting older, which is like life is just beginning. So this duality of life just beginning and life ending. When I came back, you know, I started working on paintings that are more circular. I wanted to minimize what can I do in terms of shape that could represent life, and a circle is that shape. So I started making these paintings that are circular. A circle is a beginning, and that was also the time that I came back, you know, for the first time since I left. A circle is infinite, and yeah, so after that, then I wanted to have an object where this circle could expand into space, and what else can I use in terms of object that has that same, you know, strong content. And an eggshell for me is that object. An eggshell is, you know, these eggshells are broken shells, so you don't know if this is a sign of life or this is a sign of death. And so there's that duality in that. But I also think that the eggshell, because of all of these jagged edges, you know, it's such a beautiful symbol of life. And you know, in life, there's these like really smooth bottom of the eggshell. It's like, yeah, life sometimes can be sweet and smooth and everything works out, yay. And then oftentimes, you know, there are all these jagged edges, you know, like what the crap, you know. Yeah, we're like, you know, but yeah, so, but that's the beauty of it, right? It's this contrast of harshness and softness that you could kind of have together. So that was kind of like the idea, and from there, you know, I started making this installation. It's called In Time. I wanted to slow down time too, and that was one of the things that I noticed is like time moves so fast. Like, you know, like they're getting older, grandparents, and, you know, my cousins are getting older. So how can I just slow it down just a little bit, you know, in my own little head. So that's how I find the idea, or I have the idea to suspend them in the air. And they move ever so slightly, but you know, there's this kind of timelessness of the installation that I really enjoy. And yeah, and then so I started thinking about like, oh, what happened if it expand in space? Like, what happened if it take over a space? What happened if it goes down to the floor and create this kind of infinite space? Yeah, I'm a trained painter originally, so everything that I make is two-dimensional. And then everything that is like three-dimensional is an illusion, right, in painting. In this case, you know, I wanted to expand space where it could truly be in three-dimensional space, where you can walk around it, where you can experience it, you can look above and down. And so it's a more of a interactive method for me at that time in 2012. So from there, I started creating more like pieces that are off the wall, or utilizing shadows, utilizing reflection to add dimension to space, rather than just an illusion, but also something that you can kind of interact with.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Despite a rich, centuries-old tradition of Islamic portraiture, I think that a lot of people today are familiar with the Taliban and bans on art that represents particularly the human figure. Adam, do you know whether the Indonesian people at that time would have been averse to art that featured figuration? And then Cynthia, do you think that that has influenced your work in abstract and conceptual art?
So I'm not 100% sure. My inclination would be there wouldn't be some wholesale feeling against that. Indonesia, you know, we're obviously focusing on ethnic Chinese, but there's made up of over 1,000 different ethnic groups. So there's really not one general consensus for something like that, a majority consensus. The problem was, I'm sure there were times where those things were expressed, but it had to be done privately, because I imagine that the various regimes were censoring art and other things.
Well, and also, we've mentioned that Indonesia is the most populous Muslim nation on earth, but it's also, in fact, one of the most populous nations on earth, period. So it would make perfect sense that there would be a lot of different subcultures and different groups within a population that large.
Yeah.
So, Cynthia, do you think that any of that has played into your choice of non-representational work?
No, so as an art student, I was trained more of representational work, mostly focusing in architecture work, so dilapidated buildings or dilapidated storefronts and things like this, using oil paint and also charcoal. And I think the love of that come from, I wanted to be an architect when I was younger, but then I found out that I have to take a lot of math classes, and
That's
I'm like,
why I didn't do it.
I'm like, I don't know about that. So I think that love of architecture and structure sort of kind of seep into my interests visually in like buildings and old, you know, especially dilapidated buildings, because I think it holds so much more stories, these dilapidated buildings. And so at that time, you know, the quest was about, how do I paint this realistically? How do I exhaust all of these art training that I already have? And then for me, you know, I'm like, okay, yeah, this started to get boring. So, okay, let's do something else. How do I minimize it so that it could be just lines and structure and, you know, like shadows or whatever it is. I think that's how the progression sort of shifted, is because how do I present an idea of home without painting a home. You know, so that's it. So the work that I'm making started to think about these concepts and ideas and abstraction rather than representation or realism.
If there were one thing that visitors to your exhibition here could take away with them, what would you hope they would get from enjoying your work here?
Oh, that's a big question. What can an artist hope? Well, I hope that it could resonate with them. I hope that they take the time to see these pieces, because it does require looking. Like some of these pieces, like if you glance through them, okay, but when you come closer, then you know you start seeing these marks. They're just slightly different tone, or this red that you know you see in the painting that you may not see in the first time. But I love that slow moment of like connection with the work, and yeah, I hope that the viewers will just take a little bit of time to slow down, you know, and just explore, and hopefully it connects with you, you know. Hopefully it resonates. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do either of you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with the audience that I've neglected to ask you about? Any important details that we want to give to the audience before we wrap up?
So we talked a lot about the Suharto regime, and I know that a lot of those anti-Chinese policies fell with the fall of the Suharto regime. What your family who is in Indonesia currently, what have been their experiences post Suharto?
Well, my cousins, I mean, they're like me, they can't speak Chinese. So, you know, our whole generation is just, yeah. But nowadays, the Chinese schools are back. You're able to see Chinese writings in stores. And actually, some of the Indonesian school required Mandarin in their classes nowadays, because there's a lot of relationship with China in terms of building infrastructure back in the city. So yeah, I think, you know, developing countries like Indonesia, I feel like the ground is always shifting. And then now we have a president who's the son-in-law of Suharto. So things are there's a little bit of tension there.
There's uncertainty.
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. So I'm not sure. I think right now from the outside it looks stable and they're welcoming. The Chinese New Year is now a national a holiday, so at least they acknowledge that now.
And it was actually the first female president of Indonesia that made Chinese New Year a national holiday.
Yeah.
That was a really big step.
She's the daughter of Sukarno. Megawati was.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. For me,
Absolutely,
I think,
it's your show.
well, I think if anybody have any questions, like, you know, online or here, you're welcome. But if we finish and then there's still more questions, maybe you could connect with Johnson Center, and then maybe Johnson Center could send those questions our way, and we can answer them post-talk.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, if anyone in the audience...
Yeah, oh yeah.
So you live between New York City and Montgomery.
Yes.
So it's really interesting hearing your past and how it's influencing your artwork. And how do you see where you are now, like in your current environments? How do you see New York City? Because obviously they're quite different.
Yeah.
How do you see that influencing your art?
New York, I'm still new. I'm still navigating everything. And I think the biggest challenge that I don't have there that I have here is space. You know, I mean, all artists in New York will tell you this thing. And so navigating, creating work in a smaller space for me is challenging. But these days, I think the focus was, this might be the next few things, but I started creating holograph and I started creating cyanotype because I can do that in my living room space. That's essentially my studio in New York. You know, it's like, yeah, it's not glamorous. 1-bedroom apartment and then a living room space where I could create small pieces. I'm still navigating because this is the other thing is when you live in a certain place, you build community. So you have a foot and root. And then when you start over in a way, the first thing that I have to do is to build community. And so right now I'm just navigating and building my community. Yeah, I'm not sure how, I'm not sure where the direction will take me. Right now I'm just being open to all of the experiences. I do love that in Alabama or Montgomery, I'm able to explore more of socially engaged projects where, it's in New York, there's always things happening, always, 24/7. Every single day there's an art opening. Every single day there's an art event. But places like Montgomery, where things could be quiet sometimes, it gives you the opportunity to think about like projects more maturely, and then you have, I think it's a little easy. I don't want to say it's easier, but maybe I can. It's a little easier to think of a project and do it, In New York, it's a little difficult for me at the moment. So I'm not able to do my socially engaged projects there. And I don't think they care because everybody else is doing socially engaged projects. But places like Montgomery, it's like there's not a lot. So there's an opportunity for artists to be able to do the work that they needed to do and change a place like Montgomery. But in New York, there's already so many.
And I raised.
Yeah, but the challenge that I have here in Montgomery is two-dimensional work or like contemporary art. It's hard to show it because there's not enough spaces like that to show it. There is the museum, Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts, which is beautiful. But the problem with that is, I think there's this identifier words where you're from Montgomery, you're a local artist, therefore you can't show in a local museum, so to speak. So I don't know, I think it's difficult because there's a distinction of artists who are professional and then artists who are hobbyists. But how would you create that distinction when you're labeled local? I don't know if that makes sense, but there's, it seems like there's a hierarchy of showing.
But you've founded some initiatives in the Montgomery area, and
Yeah.
I sort of raced through those in the introductions. Can you talk a little bit about some of those projects?
Sure, yeah. Again, trying to find and build community. When I moved back to Montgomery in 2017, 16, 17 at that time, I didn't know a lot of people because I couldn't speak English. So, I left and then I learned English in college and then I came back and I don't really have a lot of friends. So it's like, okay, how do I find my people, And then I opened my house, I turned it into an art gallery, I pulled the carpet, I put track lights, and then I started an artist residency. I started inviting artists who I met along the way in grad school or friends of friends that would like to come to Montgomery to learn about the city. And then before that, I had an art publication that I created with a couple of people in grad school. And so that's how we were able to kind of fund the residency because it wasn't a nonprofit. So bringing the artists to Montgomery, I started meeting artists in Montgomery through the art houses, and then building that community. Yeah. I mean, and then COVID hit, everything just sort of shifted.
Well, but it's all still engaging different concepts of home.
Yeah, yeah, home and belonging, definitely. Yeah, yeah. I don't know if I answer your question. I think that's the theme. It's like, oh, I don't want to answer your question.
So, anyone else? Well, if no one else here has any questions, as Cynthia said, if you'd like to contact the Johnson Center, then I'm sure that Andrea would be happy to forward them to Cynthia so that she can let people know. And thank you all again for being here. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.